All right, so last stream I was working on trying to do test-driven development to build up a Express service, and we kind of focused on building out one endpoint called create idea. And we had to bring in a couple packages, like we brought in MongoDB, NodeMon, and we set up our routes. So let me just do a quick overview so that I understand what we were doing and where we're trying to go. So we made this index file that hosted our service, and then we created a router, which we passed in that MongoDB client to. And then we created our endpoints. We're going to create our endpoints in here. So we have an endpoint that's a post request to /routes or to ideas. And then we call create idea handler here, which creates the handler for pretty much parsing the request and passing it to my interactor. We have the interactor here, which we haven't built yet. And then we have the create idea persistence layer. So I went ahead and opened all those files so we have a good understanding of what we're trying to do. But yeah, we're trying to do test-driven development, and we haven't yet created the implementation for create idea interactor. So let us try to focus on that. And also down here, I have Jest running with a watcher. So every time I save a file, it's supposed to rerun my tests. And you'll notice here that down here, this is failing. I think this is my integration test that's failing. But yeah, we will just try to work through this. Actually, let's see if I can get this passing. So this is supposed to return testing. I have an integration test that is failing with testing. So just to make this pass for now, I'm going to put testing here. That should make that test at least pass. And actually, it's just let's see. We'll come back and fix this. I just want this to pass, and we'll come back and refactor. All right, so we have two tests that are passing now, and then we have our create idea interactor test, which is failing. So if I go to our actual create idea interactor test, what is it that we're trying to test here? We're trying to make sure that if we pass in the DB, we pass in the idea that we want to create, and maybe some other stuff like the user's object or user model or something like that. And then we probably want to check like validation and stuff like that, but we'll keep it simple. And we're just going to pass in an idea with a description. And I will put testing here. And what do we want to verify with this interactor? Let me go ahead and close everything. So the interactor should take that idea and obviously do validation on it to make sure you pass in all the correct properties that should be on an idea, such as a description, or maybe a user ID or a timestamp or something. And we'll do that in a second, but we also need to make sure we pass this create idea in a DB. But since we're mocking stuff out, this is our unit test, we can kind of mock out create idea because that's kind of a external dependency. And we could probably mock out DB, but I don't think we need to because if we don't call create idea with DB, then it doesn't matter. So anyway, inside our test, when we're calling create idea interactor, we could pass the create idea and give it just a function that does nothing. Actually, probably should return the idea. So if we were to mock out what this does, this should pretty much return the newly created idea that was created from the database. So it will probably have an ID on it. So just to mock that out, we could say ID 123. Actually, let me go over here. Okay, so the idea that we put into the function is this. Like so in Postman, someone would post this, and then what would be returned or sent back basically be that same idea but with an ID on it. And let's see. So now we should expect the idea to pretty much equal what this mock is. Let's see. So if I run this, we are getting a failing test because we forgot to put async here. Anytime you're using await, you need to make sure your function signature has async in front of it. So let's rerun the test again. And it's saying that we're getting back undefined for idea, but we're expecting it to equal this. So I think we have a correct test. I mean, obviously it's super basic, and I don't know if it really tests real functionality, but we're expecting an idea to come back with an ID, but we're getting undefined. So let's go to our actual implementation and figure out why it's failing. Well, obviously it's failing because we haven't implemented anything, right? So if we basically call create idea, pass it DB and pass it idea. Let me make sure I got this signature correct. So this takes a DB object and an idea object. So after running that, which is obviously going to be a mock, and you can mock out the database if you don't want to actually mock out your persistence method. You could mock out the DB object that's going into the persistence method and require the actual real create idea function. That's kind of up to you. It really depends on how much you want to test and what you're testing. But since we are already mocking out the DB object here in this create idea persistence test, it seems kind of silly to mock it out once again. But I don't know. There's no wrong or right way to do tests. There's just a couple of things you want to try to make sure you do, like make sure your tests aren't brittle. What else? Obviously, make sure your tests are easy to read, they're clean. Um, oh yeah, make sure they're actually testing the right thing. There's many times that you'll write tests and like they're not actually testing anything. Like they'll pass, but they're passing because you forgot to write your test properly. So this is why they recommend you do red green test refactoring, because you want the test to actually fail and you can see it fail before you actually implement stuff. But yeah, I'm just rambling about stuff now. So let me just add async here, and I'm going to await on that. And I need to make sure I return that in this function here. And at this point, it's like you might think this is silly. It's like all these functions really don't do anything. They just take in an object and return the same object. But we're going to add more functionality here, such as like authorization checks to make sure a user has access to create an idea. And then we might actually add an idea model or entity so we can validate that whatever was passed in has the data that was required. So let's see. That time async was evoked. So what's going on here? The test that's failing is my integration test, and it seems like it's not actually returning anything. So if I go to Postman and try to debug this, you'll notice that it's just spinning forever. So let me go back and let me try to figure out why that is. But if you see here, I think the other test passed. So the test we were writing passed. So we should be good. And we'll come back later and add more functionality when we have a better idea of what we're trying to build. So let me go to my integration test. And let's see. I'm going to actually revert this back to well, it's already failing. So let's try to fix it. So why would this be failing? Well, if we go to the handler first, let's check. This is sending back testing, which means that this is probably never resolving. And to double check that that is the case, I could just simply add a console log here. Let me get rid of something. It's like formatting my code when I paste stuff. I do not want that. Format and paste, get out of here. All right, so let us run this. Is it rerunning the test every time I save? It sure is. All right, so if I go here and run this code, it's actually throwing an exception. So this goes back to our factory function should probably be catching exceptions and then doing something with it. So in all of my handlers, you can usually do a try catch around the main function you're calling. We could probably write a unit test for this as well, which means that we probably want this to actually come in as a dependency here, but we will do that in a second. Let's just console log the error here. You know what? Sorry, I want to do this properly. Test-driven development. Let's look back at what it's actually failing about. It's saying create idea is not a function. So if we go to create idea interactor, we did not import it. Well, we don't need to import it. It should be coming in here. So we might not be passing it in correctly. So if we go back to our create idea interactor, handler, this expects a create idea. So I'm going to say create idea. And I will see if I can just auto import that. So create idea equals require persistence create idea. And all this design is still kind of up in the air. Like I might refactor it, but let us see if we can hit our endpoint now. Still seems to be crashing on something. So what's going on here? Cannot read property of underscore of undefined. Okay. Well, underscore ID is related to MongoDB, but I'm not sure why it would need to do that. And if we look at the actual stack trace, it looks like it's failing at, where is it actually failing at? Failing at persistence create idea. I'm going to add I was going to say debugger, but it might just be easier to do this. All right, let me stop my test for a second so that it doesn't keep on running stuff. And I'm going to go back and just print out like some type of console log here so we know if we're getting to this function. And I could also use a debugger. I'm just too lazy to stop my server and rerun it. All right, so we got to ABC and then it fails here. And the question is why is it failing here? What is being passed into this? You know what? Let me just do this properly. Let me go here, add a break statement, debug with node. It just takes so much extra time to load up my debugger because my computer's not that fast. While that's loading up, do we got any watchers? Got one person. All right, so I'm gonna hit my endpoint. That should have stopped. Yo, is it not gonna stop at this? What's going on here? Okay, there we go. So idea is passed in as undefined, so that's probably our issue. If we go back to the create idea interactor, idea is passed in here, which is passed in here, which probably means that we're not passing it in the handler factory. Yeah, so idea needs to come from rec.body. All right, so going back, let me just explain one more time what we're doing here. So the reason we are kind of wrapping this, like if most tutorials you watch online are going to just have like a ton of logic just inside your express callback. Like they might be hitting a database in your callback, checking authentication, authorization, all this other stuff. And they're doing too much logic in a single function. So what you want to do is you typically separate that logic out and isolate your express service from your internal business logic, right? So you don't want your code internally that deals with the business logic knowing about rec and res. So you wrap it inside some approach. Like this is the approach I'm using, but you pretty much wrap it and call it and pass in what you need. So in this case, I'm just passing in the idea from rec.body. But you could pass in basically anything you need. So like let's say there's a user login information that needs to happen. You could pass that in there as well by grabbing like the headers and parsing them and stuff. But the main goal is that this file should know nothing about Express. And the reason for that is if you isolate your code from whatever framework or library that's hosting your endpoints, it makes it really easy to switch over to something like AWS Lambda, or if you want to use like Happy or Koa or some other framework that may have a different implementation of how they do rec and res, then you can do that with little ease, or with ease, with little difficulty. And then we're doing the same thing with all these other layers, right? So this layer, create idea, you'll notice that a lot of people just, try to initiate the database here and then call it inside their main route. But again, you're embedding your like database code inside of your business logic. So if you ever decide to use a different database like MySQL, you're kind of screwed because now it's extremely hard to refactor all your code to point to a new database. Where this approach is if you call a like a service that's wrapping your database code, it makes it really easy to switch over to a different database. And more specifically, since this is passed inside the function signature, I can pick and choose which endpoints go to which databases really easily by just passing in a different implementation of my create idea function. And this is called a repository approach. I found the what's it called? The design pattern. I'm pretty sure it's called a repository approach. But basically, it's just a way to wrap your database calls. And then even furthermore, inside of this, you could wrap DB. DB could be something that's wrapping your MongoDB node driver. Like I'm using MongoDB, which is an NPM package. But let's say you want to use Mongoose, right? Well, what I have here does not easily allow us to switch over to a different library for connecting to Mongo because I have all of this MongoDB code embedded in my persistence method. But what would be a better approach is you could pass in your own like interface that wraps whatever you're using to connect to Mongo. So if down the road I decide this was a bad approach to do the MongoDB driver and I need to use Mongoose instead, well, I could just have a set of, you know, generic methods like insert record or delete record and stuff, and I can call that in this function so that if I want to switch over, I simply just go here and pass in a different type of DB object. So again, if you're a beginner, all this stuff is overkill, but as your project gets larger and you have like tons of developers contributing to a project, this approach keeps everything like kind of isolated and allows you to easily switch over your options if you run into issues with how you implemented something. All right, so I kind of just went off on a rant there. Hopefully that information was cool, good to know, but I don't even know where I was. So I think we're passing an idea in, and the issue was we weren't passing it from the body. So I should be able to hit that endpoint now. If it was running, let me run that and try to hit my endpoint, and I should get back testing. Cool. So now we can go back to our original thing that we're trying to do, which just run our tests over our endpoints to verify they actually do what we need. All right. So at this point, our integration test is checking that we get back testing, but really we should be getting back an object that has our description that we passed in to match object. And then also there should be some type of, let me pull out data here. There should be some type of ID on that idea. So I could say expect idea of ID to be defined. And I could probably further check that it's a string or an int or whatever, but I think that's a good enough approach. Instead of naming this result, I'm going to name this response because that's really what it is. All right, so let's see if this works. So I changed the test to actually test something that's more matching of what we want, and we got an issue. And it's saying that we're getting back testing when we should probably be getting back something else. Actually, maybe we got back null. Let's see what we got back here. Just print that out a couple times so it's easier to see in my logs. ID of testing. Okay, so it's kind of frustrating that this is the error we get back. Like, I wish it said, like, you got null or you got testing but expected an object. But anyway, the issue is that, remember, our endpoints are returning a hard-coded string of testing. So this test is actually working. We're actually checking something that we expect. So if I go back and kind of dive through my code, notice that we have this res.send hard-coded here. So what I can say is const ID is equal to that. And I will send back I'll say created idea. So at this point, let's see. It's saying idea of ID is not defined. And that is because when you create an object in Mongo, it attaches a ID object, but it has underscore ID in it for some reason. I don't know why they use that approach, but I don't like that approach. I rather have it be just ID. So there's probably a way to not store underscore ID. Okay, so yeah, I think it's required. So what I'm going to do here, and I don't know if this is a good approach. I haven't really used Mongo too much, but I don't like the idea that it returned us an underscore ID, and then we're using that all over our application. I rather that internal detail, right? That's a MongoDB detail. If I switch over to MySQL, I probably am not going to be using an underscore ID property to define my thing. I might actually have like an ID, or maybe just ID. But what I want to do is inside my persistence layer, in fact, before I start implementing anything, let's do test-driven development. I want to go to my create idea test, and I want to verify that ID comes back like this, right? So somewhere inside the function, it needs to map that to this. And the reason I'm doing that again is I don't want the implementation detail of MongoDB bleeding out over my entire application, right? If someone were to go to my UI and inspect their network tab and they see this, they're probably gonna be like, oh, they're using MongoDB. Is that an issue? Probably not. Maybe there's security implications because of it, but for some reason I just don't like that idea of having like an underscore in front of my ID. So anyway, what I'm trying to do is, what's going on here? Something just crashed. So let me resave this and make sure that this test is failing. So it's saying it expects idea or ID, but it didn't get it. So inside our actual implementation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just set that. So ID is equal to underscore ID. And then I'm going to delete created idea of underscore ID. Now this could probably be cleaned up. And if there's a different approach for doing this, let me know. But let me delete some of this stuff. So now if my tests rerun, does it rerun my... Ooh. Yeah, so when I save a test file, it restarts my service, but then it's also restarting my test runner at the same time. So there's like a race condition where sometimes the service is down when my tests try to run and it just crashes. So anyway, you notice here we have 3 passing tests now. So our persistence layer test is passing. It's giving us back what we expect. The interactor use case layer is passing. We get back what we expect. Obviously, because that's mocked out, but... And then our handler, our integration test, which tests the endpoint, is additionally giving back what we expect. So there we have it. Okay, don't hard code localhost 5000. Base URL is equal to, I'll hard code it up here then. So I will just hard code that constant to make it a little bit cleaner, but it doesn't really bias too much. Okay, so there you have it. We pretty much built out and tested an entire post endpoint using test-driven development, or trying to use test-driven development. Yes, Arup. Welcome to the stream. And yeah, TDD means test-driven development. I should probably actually rename this to put that in the title so people know, but how long have I been streaming for? In 26 minutes. So I might not be streaming for too much longer. I'm going to try to do one more endpoint. I'm going to do a GET request endpoint. So let us see if we can achieve that. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and add all my code. So finishing up the create idea endpoint and tests. So I'll add all those to commit GraphQL Express. Anyway, I will do this and I'll push that. So that was just, I'm using Git if you're not familiar. That's version control. I'm just committing my files so that anyone else who's watching the stream or in the future can actually grab my files down and play around with what I'm trying to do. But yeah, okay, so we want to build out a new endpoint where we can get back an idea using an ID. So starting off, you're doing test-driven development. I'm not sure which layer I should probably start in. Maybe I could just start in the integration layer. So I'm going to copy this test and call it get idea by ID test. So I have base URL kind of hard coded twice, so there's probably a better way I could do that. So I'm going to just add a new config.js file and just export that. Exports base URL. So then I could just import that. So base URL is equal to, come on now, require config. All right, so I'm going to import that one and then import here just to kind of clean up that code. So get idea by ID is going to look like this. It's going to be a GET request on an endpoint called ideas/ID. And this should return the idea with the specified ID. All right, so in this case, we don't actually have an ID that's going to be hard-coded into our MongoDB database. So we might have to like seed Mongo before we run our tests. I don't know if that's a good idea. Let's see. We'll figure out a way to do this, but basically we want to do a GET request on an endpoint and pass it a idea ID. And we don't care about passing a body, so let's just get rid of that stuff. And then we get a response back with idea. We get a status of 200, and then we expect it to match something. Okay, so at this point, we obviously don't have an endpoint, right? So if I were to just run this test, npx jest watch, I'm going to pass this test path. That test should fail because A, there is no endpoint, and B, we don't actually return anything. DID is not defined, right? I'm just going to hardcode this to 1 for now, but we will fix this in a second. Okay, so we get a 404 because that endpoint is not even created yet. So we have a test that's failing, and it's failing for an actual like real reason because we don't have an endpoint. So let's go back to our routes. And actually, sorry, let's go back to our index, which brings in our router. So we need to go to our router, and we need to make a new endpoint. So basically app.get on idea ID. And then I'm going to make a new handler factory called get idea by ID handler factory. And pretty much I could just import that and assume it's created. Handler factory. Oh yeah, I can just do that. All right, so we're going to import that file that we haven't created yet. So I'm just going to duplicate this. Let's see, copy and paste. Go to my router, copy this file name, paste it in here, paste that in here. None of this stuff, so testing. Don't need any of this yet. So we got a handler that returns testing in a status of 200. We've created our endpoint here. And we need to, what do we need to do now? This description is not defined. Just hardcode testing for right now. To equal testing. Let's just make this pass with a simple test like this, and then we'll go back and actually implement real logic. All right, so we're able to hit the endpoint, and we got back a testing status of our testing string of testing and a code of 200. So that is the first step. We have all that set up and ready to go. Now what we want to do is we want to build out the like inner layers. So if I go and work on the interactor, I could make a new interactor that does pretty much fetches the idea by ID. So get idea by ID interactor. And we want to also, let's see, let me comment on this stuff. We want to create a test for that and try to do test-driven development. So if I copy this test file and I paste in get idea by ID interactor test. Let me close out all this stuff. So we got our test, we got our implementation here. What we're trying to do is test our implementation to verify that if we were to pass in an ID, we get back an idea. So I'm going to say idea ID is equal to 123. And we're going to assume that there is a get idea persistence method here that we can pass it an idea. That's hard to say. And then we get back an idea here. So this one, get idea by ID interactor. We imported that. We're calling it, we're mocking out the get idea method. And then this is just going to return a fake. Let me do this. Idea ID is equal to 123. So this is proper. I'm going to just bring this out here. That should return us an object that has all that stuff. Now at this point, we're not actually running that. So let me just go ahead and run that test right there. And it should fail because we haven't actually implemented anything inside this interactor, right? So we got back undefined, but we expected this. So let's try to implement this interactor to actually achieve what we want. So we're going to assume, you saw here we had a signature that it requires get idea, and it also requires an idea ID. Technically it requires DB, but we're going to mock that out. So what we can do here is just basically call these, pass it the idea ID, and return the idea that we get back. So if I save this, let's see if we get a passing test now, and we do. So we can assume that this is doing, you know, what we want. It takes in an ID, and then it returns you an idea. And of course, this is mocked out, so it's not really testing too much, but it is testing some logic, which is better than testing no logic. So let's move on to yet the next part. We don't have a persistence method for getting that idea. So if I go to my persistence folder, I'm going to rename this a get idea by ID. Actually, let me rename all this. I want to keep it consistent, so call that one, and I'll call this one. Let's see, how long has this been streaming for? 36 minutes. All right, I got to wrap this up pretty soon. So let's see if we can get by this. All right, get idea by ID is not defined. And that is probably because, where is our interactor? Okay, it's passing now. All right, so we're trying to work on a test-driven development for this method here. Let me comment out all this stuff. Get idea by ID. And that, I need to make a test to verify that this actually does what we want. Should return the, should try to fetch the idea from MongoDB. All right, so this is the test that we're trying to run. And since we're going to be mocking out this collection stuff, there should be a find we can use. So let me go to MongoDB, npm docs. Do I want reference? Let's go to reference and go to that CRUD stuff. So they have CRUD operations. I think there's a method called find one. Let us see. There's find. You know, actually, let me go back to the API. Doesn't hurt to have both of these docs opened up. All right, so if I say find, there should be a find one. There is. Okay, so if we do find one, we can pass it a query. And I think you need like an object, MongoDB object. This is the one thing I don't like about Mongo. Like, why do you have to define an object ID? Okay. So I think you can just, okay, yeah. All right, so there's a find one method on Dynamo, or on Mongo. So we're gonna mock that out and just return back. What does this return? This returns a results callback, which has result. A result object if the command was executed successfully. All right, so this should have result, and this should have a single object on it. We should get back an ID without that underscore. So let's just go ahead and start trying to run that test. npx jest watch. Which one was this? Get idea by ID. So I'll run this test, and I want to verify that it fails first. And it did. because we're getting back undefined, obviously because we aren't doing anything. So in this method, let's just go ahead and uncomment this. And we could change this to, I think it's result, would be idea. And collection ideas, find one. And we need to pass it, I think this is how you do it, ID of object ID of idea ID, something like that. We'll find out. But this method basically just takes an ID here, and we need to make sure that we import object ID from MongoDB. I think that's how you do it. If not, we will find out when we write our integration tests. So at this point, we should get back an idea, which we can return like this. Try to, let's see, result is not defined. Let me resave this. I need to fix that. I don't know why. I need to make basically nodemon not restart when I change a test file. All right, should try to fetch. Okay, so this is working. This is doing what we expect. Now the real question is does this actually work when we try to hit the endpoint? So now let's go back and try to run. I think we have everything almost linked together. Maybe not. We'll see. npx jest. We want to run our integration test now, which is this one. And we want to verify that we actually get back a real description of something if we pass in an ID. But unfortunately, we don't actually have anything in the database here. So what we could do is we could say up before each, and we could just insert one. And then on top of that, what we could do is we could import some stuff. So I think if we go to index, we kind of want to do some of the same logic when it comes to MongoDB. I could probably pull this out into a different helper function. So bring in the MongoDB client, set up the database name, don't need router. We need to connect and get the DB object. Okay, so before each, we will run that code, which basically sets up our database connection inside our Jest test. And then we want to basically insert, actually we don't need to, what we could do is just import that helper persistence method that we have. So we have a method called create idea, and that is located in persistence create idea. And all we need to do to run this is we just pass it the DB object, and we just pass it our idea. So I'll say description is ABC. And then up here, I should be able to say created idea is equal to await on that. Let that equal null up here. And we want to make sure that we can get back the created idea ID. And that should come back with created idea of ID. Does that seem right? So we create an idea. We should get an ID back. Then we try to fetch it using the ID. And then we verify that we got back what we expect. So let us try to run this. And it should probably fail now because we obviously aren't returning anything. So it's saying we expected this. We got back testing. Oh, look, we got an ID back. So this code is actually working, right? We actually created an idea here, but we are not doing something correct. So let's go back to our route. And we need to make sure that we try to fetch the actual idea here. So I'm going to say idea is get idea by ID interactor. Get idea by ID persistence. Pass that in. Pass in idea ID. That comes from params of idea ID. Because you remember in our router here, that's how we defined it. Let me just double check. So idea. Yeah, so that should come from the params. And then what we want to do is send back that idea we got back. Let's see if our test run. So it looks like it's timing out. So let us go to this interactor and make sure that we are doing something correctly. Actually, it's going to be easier if I just use Postman now. So at this point, I should be able to create an idea. We get back an ID, and then I should be able to do a GET request for that ID, and that is crashing. So it must not be getting here, which means that we're getting stuck somewhere here. So let's just verify that we get in here. So restart that, click send. We get the idea here, so cool. Can I read property ID of undefined? Actually, there's a stack trace and it tells us where it's crashing. So it's saying line 7, and this is failing. So let me just print out what result is here. So console log result. Give that a hot minute to restart. We get back this. So we are actually getting something. Okay, so the issue was I was trying to like map something to something else, which is not what we want to do. So I just want to do this. You know what? In fact, I'm just going to do this. Call it idea. All right, so if I run this, we get back that idea. So it is working in terms of Postman. Now let's make sure it's working in terms of our integration test that actually tries to create something and put it in the database, then fetch it back using our REST URL. All right, so we got back. What did we get back? We got back something. So we put in ABC and we're expecting something. So that obviously is not the correct thing. So let's save that so that it reruns the test. And compare values serialized to what the heck is that? Let me rerun that. I'm not sure what that test was. Printing internal object structure without calling to JSON instead. That's kind of strange. Maybe there's a maybe you have to call like to JSON on this. This is kind of strange. We'll find out in just a second. So let's see. You know what? I shouldn't have to do that because we already tested that our endpoint works, right? We saw here, you click it, we get back something. So this is all working fine. I think the issue is like, we must be trying to print something that we shouldn't. Hmm. Let's see. Should return the idea with specified ID. I feel like maybe this is the issue. Let's go back to Dynamo and there should be like a toJSON method, I think. You can call that on something. Not sure what you can call it on, but I think I need to call it here because this is probably returning the raw like MongoDB stuff. So let's just try that and see. I really gotta fix that. I'm gonna fix that when I go off the stream in a little bit. I'm actually gonna get off stream in probably like 2 minutes here. toJSON is not a function. Why is this failing? Like, I understand one's an object ID. I feel like it has to do with this. Created ID of that. There's a way, okay, MongoDB, convert result to JSON. Shows the find method different. To array. Or not like a to JSON. Find one. Okay. How do we get the actual raw JSON? To JSON. You know, they just call a method, but they don't tell you where it comes from. I hate when docs do that. Like, why does documentation is like bulk to JSON? Maybe I'm just not understanding what I'm reading. Hold on. Collection find. Print to JSON. Like, where is it? Where is this defined? Is that a method I have to write? MongoDB to JSON. This is the same one I just read. Cursor to string. JSON stringify. Cursor next. Nah, that's probably not what I want. I don't want Mongoose. I want the normal stuff. How do I import JSON? You know what? I could just do this. Set this equal to this plus a string. I don't know if that's how you actually do it. I feel like that'll work though. But I think this is returning back. See, this isn't even a string. This is like something else. So, toString? Maybe I need to do that. Maybe this is coming back as a buffer. Hold on, let me go back. Okay. Click on this. What time is it? 8:30. I'm giving it one more minute and then I'm gonna drop off this stream. But yeah, I mean that's the gist of everything. Everything is working, but this test is for some reason the object ID coming back from Mongo is not. Yeah, so like the response gives me back a string. What I'm checking against is not a string. I don't know how to convert this to a freaking string in Mongo. Like that should work, but it's not gonna work. Okay, that fixed it. I think that fixed it. We can we'll come back and try to figure out why that's happening, but it's definitely related to object ID. So now at this point, if I say npm test, that's going to run everything that I have, and it should verify that everything is working, hopefully. At least I hope it does, because I'm not going to try to debug it if it fails. No, it did fail. ID is undefined. Get idea by ID. Why is ID undefined? Find one. Where's ID? Okay, here it is. Get idea by ID. That is why. This test needs to do that. All right, let me try running them all again, and I'm going to commit my code, and I'm going to wrap up this stream. So I need to read through the docs of MongoDB. Come on. Should try to fetch the idea. No, that was probably right. Expected that, received ID of undefined. And why would that be the case? Result is ID of that, ID of undefined. Yo, this is so frustrating. You know, it's probably because I'm using this object ID crap. Let me just use a real one. It's probably the issue. Find one. Well, I'm mocking that out, right? So that shouldn't be an issue. All right, last run. Run this one last time. I'm gonna end the stream. Need to go get ready for work and stuff. Cool. All right. Well, I will debug this next time, but thank you so much for watching if you are watching, and have a good day.